Hey, welcome to the next online gathering of MicroChurch Next. We're trying to create a table, a virtual fire that we can gather at together to tune into what Jesus is doing in the hearts of thousands of people as we see new movements of microchurches emerging here in the West. Today's going to be a great conversation. Really glad you're here. So, hey, good morning, Brian and Brian.
Good morning.
Yeah, we're trying to make this easy. You can just speak to both of
Brian's
us.
here.
Exactly.
It
Brian squared.
could get confusing. That's like George Foreman. Aren't all his boys named George? So that's,
Right.
I mean, it's convenient to just shout George, but
Yeah.
it can be confusing.
Well, if they all show up, at least somebody's going to get something done that was going to be requested.
You have an army of Georges ready.
You do. So
Well, so we have one of our directors here in Kansas City. His name is Corey. And now we have this multiplication of Corys, but I always give Corey a hard time because he's connected to these global disciple making movement leaders. And I swear 70 to 80% of them are named David. I'm like, I don't like, can you do this globally? If you don't, you have to change your name. Anyway, sorry. Well, let's bring it back.
the Davids. Yeah, there you go.
We are in this series that we call the return of the microchurch. And Brian, this is like the last sort of episode in this little series. And I was thinking about this introduction today. We've been reminding people, hey, we're in this series of return of the microchurch every week. And I thought this is going to be really weird intro for you to hear a return of the microchurch, since it's not a return for you. It is just the paradigm in which you have lived in for the last 20 years. But we have seen this flourishing in the global South, and we see this movement towards it here in the West. And we're thrilled about it because we know that for biblical reasons and missiological reasons, it's such an important conversation for this moment that we're in, especially in a post-pandemic world where we're asking, what do forms of the church look like, and why should we be dreaming with a new missional imagination? Mm-hmm. So I'm looking forward to the conversation as well.
Well, and today's theme is on the topic of calling and the missionary life. I can't think of a better person for us to have this conversation with than you, Brian. And again, if Jesus' plan is to fill everything every way, the question is, how is he going to do that? And in the predominant model, there's been primarily a volunteerism model. Grateful for what God's done through the volunteer movement. It has got a lot of people up off their butts and into some form of missional activity, but that's not what we're speaking about today. We believe that Jesus' strategy to fill everything every way is by each of us discovering the unique piece of mission that has our name on it. In the Kansas City Underground, we like to call it your masterpiece mission out of Ephesians 2:10. So we celebrate, everyone's got this primary calling to make disciples, but within that, there's a one-of-a-kind masterpiece mission. And so today, most of you know Brian Sanders. He's a social entrepreneur. He has his hands in a lot of different pies. He's a founder of both Tampa Underground and the Underground Network. And Brian, I know right now you've got a couple of new jobs that I'd love for you to share about in just a couple of minutes, but Brian and I were saying this earlier. We wouldn't be here doing what we're doing if it weren't for the influence of Brian Sanders. I know way back in the early 2000s when I was trying to run some experiments inside of this mega church, I had a buddy who lives down in Tampa, and he's like, have you heard about this Tampa Underground thing? I was like, no. And he sent me the website, and I started reading it. I was like, it was glowing, not just from the screen, but like the Holy Spirit was like, whoa, what is this? What is this? So I became kind of an affectionate stalker ever since then. So Brian, thank you for being here today, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good. It is a kind of surreal experience over the course of 15 years, which is not that long a time, to see, I don't know, the idea of empowered, decentralized, smaller versions of church that, the priest of all believers, that sort of thing, become, to go from being resisted maybe at some level, or to then actually dismissed probably initially, then resisted, then seen as a threat,
Yep.
and now sort of being warmly embraced. And I know some of us that have been in this world might feel a little bit hard done by that or bitter or something, but I just don't feel that way at all.
Yeah.
I think as I've tried to follow Jesus in this different way, I just feel more mercy actually and patience for the church at large in general, not less. I was probably more angry early on about how things were done, but I'm just happy. I guess I'm just happy that we're having these conversations, that everybody at least is considering the possibility that there are people who have seen maybe as units, that make up the size of their church, the significance of their church, to see them again as called people, as missionaries, as apostles, whatever. So that's pretty cool. And for the most part, I'm just happy to be talking about it.
Yeah. Well, why don't you give us a little bit more where you are right now, because you've transitioned into some new roles. So what does the current life of Brian Sanders look like?
Well, it's funny. I was thinking the other day how it's maybe just not God's will for me to be doing or leading in a space where most people would agree with me, or so just when just when there's kind of
just when the plowing was easy,
popular adoption of this idea, I'm sort of on to something else. But yeah, I think for me, one of the meta skills of the 21st century, one of three primary meta skills, is the idea of collaboration, to be able to work across organizational purposes, and to be able to break down what has traditionally in the 20th century in the Western world been a motif of competition, success or competition. And that idea is really dying, and in its place is this emerging value, or this emerging skill of collaboration, which we don't have. So we hear it, we think of it, it feels right, the 21st century, like we ought to be collaborating, but actually the skill set required for leaders to understand how to bring their organization into a cross-organizational plan or a cross-organizational labor, it's just foreign to us. We actually don't know how to do it, and we don't know how to build complex strategic plans together. We don't know how to pull in the same direction. So as much as we may want to do that, it's a nascent technology. It's a nascent social technology that has to be worked out, iterated. So that's one of the roles that I have right now with the National Christian Foundation, is working on convening and creating impact alliances around key causes, and convening agency heads from all across that cause. The other thing I'm doing is working with a really cool co-working company, which is trying to expand all around America right now, and helping them come into Florida. It's called Cohatch, and we don't want to talk about that because there's plenty of other things to talk about, but it's a beautiful possibility of a merger of sort of a for-profit business idea that can create an ecosystem where some of our decentralized church technology can fit into. So I think it could be a sort of solution to the facilities problem, which those of us that have been trying to do decentralized church, we have to solve that. It's a puzzle that we have to be able to figure out. The conventional legacy form of church had physical plant figured out, to fit its model. But we're still trying to figure out how to do that. I mean, Rob, I can remember us driving around Kansas City and just being like, how do you do space in a city like this, which is so spread out, and so many different pockets? And do you have 15 buildings? Do you have what do you do? So anyway, so that's the two big jobs I have right now.
The second one, have you been watching the new show on Apple TV about WeWork?
Yeah, and I've read 2 or 3 of the books about Adam Newman, and it's a cautionary tale. Although it's not dissimilar to the story of Christians with megalomaniac tendencies or wanting to
Totally.
take the world or whatever. So it's just sort of a secular version of what we've been reading in our own sad stories lately anyway.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, hey, we want to dive deep today into, again, the place of calling in the life of a missionary and how calling is connected to the emergence of microchurches. And I know this has been a big piece of your life work. And I'm curious, take us back into your story. What drew you into this fascination with calling, particularly in the life of ordinary people? Because one of the things that calling has been present in the life of the church, but it's typically been reserved for quote unquote the professionals, like Billy Graham gets a calling or your pastor gets a calling, but ordinary people haven't tended to think of it that way. But that's obviously been something you've had a healthy obsession with. So how did that start? What was the origin of that curiosity?
Well, I guess I probably, before I answer that, I probably should say that I have a sort of Pentecostal influence on me, and and I'd say I'm probably like a backsliding Pentecost.
No,
I don't speak in tongues. I don't speak in tongues enough, I guess. But
I have
besides
seen
that,
you use the
besides,
flags though. The flag
I
stuff.
don't do the flags. I'm kind of reserved in worship. So, but in my heart and in my, like, Acts 2 is everything, multi ethnicity, empowerment, um, mission, the birth of the church, the dispersion of the church. It's everything,
Mhm.
So whatever we are now, microchurches is Pentecost. It's about Pentecost,
Amen.
But right there in the midst of that origin story of the church is like the voice of God spoken to each person, contextualization in its own way, in their own language, and
Yeah.
but man, it has to be God. Like, no, it wasn't about Peter preaching a sermon. Peter preaches a sermon after to interpret the event,
Right.
the theophany, really. So something about that has always been meaningful to me, like to hear the voice of God. Also, I was a little bit anti-authoritarian growing up, so I wasn't interested in listening to other people tell me what they think I ought to do with my life or whatever. And I probably, if people would have tried, I would have just rejected it, even if they were correct, So I was not. There's something really primal and correct about, like, only Jesus can lead you, really. Only Jesus can call you. Only Jesus can give you an assignment in the world. So it's mystical, probably. And then I also think, as I've grown older and as I've tried to do this, like tried to make disciples, tried to be, a missionary person and build a missionary community and a missionary church. I think, I don't know what you guys think about this, but I think that there are discipleship systems that exist that are kind of atheistic, in the sense that I meet you, and then you can walk me through that discipleship system, and every single step that I need to become a mature person in Christ, you can do. You can teach me, right? There's no spot in there that it's like we can't do that. As a human teacher, leader, I just can't do that. So I think of, Matthew 28, where he's like, okay, you have to what? Make disciples, teach them to obey all that I've commanded, baptize them. There's definitely stuff we're supposed to do in the discipleship process, right? That's for us to do, to teach obedience and to baptize and proclaim the kingdom and so on. But then there's got to be things that only God can do, like the wooing of the soul, the irresistible, the call, the invitation, with the Holy Spirit convicting the world of sin and guilt. You can't do that. I can't do that, right? So that, conviction, comfort, appealing back of revelation over and over again. I was thinking of John 3, the other day where Jesus is like, look, unless you're born again. And of course, we have taken that and we've turned it into like a single event that happens in your life. And that's probably true. I mean, regeneration is being born again, right? But then the second part of that, where he's talking about the wind blows and anybody who's born from above is like the wind. And it's like, what does that have to do with a one-time regeneration event? It's just very confusing how John 3 doesn't read well with that interpretation, But if you think of new birth as like a peeling back of revelation, that yes, conversion is one of those things, but you should be converted 100 times in your life to some new revelation about who God is and about how the world is, and a depth of understanding about forgiveness, and realizing I'm forgiven, and then realizing that I'm meant to forgive, and then realizing about justice, and realizing about mercy, and then realizing again about, I mean, we should be waking up, I don't know, monthly or something, maybe 2-3 times a year, and being like, it's like I was born again. I have this whole new discovery, right? But that's only possible with the active presence of God in this discipleship system, right? So for me, and I don't know how you would answer it, and I think everybody listening has to think about, what discipleship system do we have, and where is there a spot in that system that you can't do, and it stops until God intervenes. Like the system breaks down at this point unless God. And for us, that has always been calling. So it's not just the conviction of sin and guilt. It's not just the comfort of walking with us in life and the peeling back of revelation and new discoveries about him. That is what discipleship looks like. But it's ascending, right? It's ultimately the missionary identity that we have as disciples. We start as disciples, we become apostles. And that apostolic calling, nobody should even try to do that. No, I don't even think it's right for a human leader to even try to say, this is what you should do with your life. This is where you should be deployed for the sake of the kingdom. So what that does, at least for us, is that left this big gaping hole in our vision of how discipleship would work, where it's like, look, if you have not heard God speak to you somehow about your assignment in this world, the people that he's called you to, this whole thing has to stop. There's nothing else we can do. And so that drives you then to figure out all of the things you can do to create an environment where that can happen, because you don't just want it to die in the water there, So that's a part of the story of the underground too, is just early on realizing we can't do anything if people don't feel called by God himself. We can't form a community, we can't plant microchurches, and we may want to do that. And you're also banking on and trusting that God actually wants to do that. Yeah. Because then you're putting it in his hands, and to some degree the frailty of that human person, that disciple, to seek an answer to the question, who am I and what have you made me to do in this world? At least for now, in this season of my life, where are you sending me? I mean, if you say I'm a missionary, or I'm called to be an overseas missionary, and I say, well, that's amazing, where are you going? And you say, well, I don't know. Well, what does that even mean then? You know what I mean? So you're called to the nations, but where are you called? Like, to what nation are you called? Well, I don't know, I haven't figured it out yet. And then I come back 10 years later. This is real. I come back 10 years later and say, have you figured it out? I said, no, I just haven't heard from God. Well, how do you buy the plane ticket? How do you learn the language? How do you pack up and move? How are you a missionary if you don't know to whom you've been sent? To where you have been sent, right? So to your point, Rob, about volunteerism, we could outsource that to a visionary leader or to a strong community to just tell us where we're supposed to go, tell us what we're supposed to do. I just think that's a huge mistake. And always have. And so essentially then you build a new place, a new kind of structure and community where it just doesn't work without having heard God.
I think as I listened to you speak, that word environments was coming right before you said it. It's like in the model of church that I grew up in, there was no space really to discern calling, because I'm being talked at all the time. And there's no space of listening. And there's no space to slow down and listen for the voice of God, because it's being filtered through someone else, that I'm given this filter. You are the voice of God for me, or whatever that is. So that's just personally convicting. Again, I'm like thinking through, man, for our network, where are we creating spaces that we're inviting people?
But listen, it's not just that, because I have this is a new discovery for me. I've done a little bit of consulting with like charismatic churches.
Yeah.
And they listen to God all the time. So they're actually, and it's kind of amazing and beautiful that the comfort with which some kinds of Christian communities can just sort of enter into the presence of God and hear the voice of God for each other.
Yeah.
Freely, liberally sharing words with each other, and yet they still don't have an answer to this question. So there is a subtle, addition to that, to say it's not just the space to listen, but it's actually the pressurizing of the question to answer.
Yeah.
So not just to listen to God, but then to come out of that place of listening and say, okay, where do I feel God is sending me? And people who are very comfortable listening to the voice of God still don't ask and answer that question.
Yeah.
And it's weird. It's like, maybe we're afraid. I don't know. Maybe there's just no.
I think there's I think there's a sense of that people have intuitively about what that's going to cost them.
Yeah, maybe.
It's like, it's such a dangerous, potent question.
Because you have to buy the plane ticket. I mean, once he says, Burundi or whatever, then it's like, okay.
I do want to say to everybody who's listening right now, may you be blessed with the courage for you to personally ask this question.
Yeah.
Even today. And if you are leading a spiritual family, a microchurch, maybe you have the courage to ask them to ask the question, even this week, when you see their faces or you're sharing a meal. There's so much of the future that's waiting to come into the present through that.
Well, and if the people we ask don't really know and don't really have an answer, which is typical, then that becomes the sort of urgent need of the community.
Yeah.
It becomes urgent need of leadership, and like, okay, I need to figure out how to help my people.
That's what I wanted to. Yeah. That's what I wanted to get to with the listening piece, was hearing a little bit about Calling Lab. Because when I was saying like this piece on, we have to create environments for listening, you're creating sort of this, or created, in my understanding of Calling Lab, this moment of maybe I'm using this language right, of what you just said, of kind of pressurizing the question. I'm putting you in a space to explore, to get an answer to that question. But a lot of that space is listening and paying attention to what is true about me, what is true about my story, and some objective coaching as well. That's like going, is this true? Maybe we can ask some better questions. So can you give us like an overview of Calling Lab? Because I know that's been an incredible resource for so many in the Tampa network and beyond.
Yeah, when we started, again, as sort of, closet Pentecostals, where we probably just thought, just go pray. So we would actually just do these weekends, calling weekends, where it was just prayer. It was just like quiet, like, silence and prayer. And then we would come at the end and be like, okay, so what's your calling, and realizing that just was not enough. I mean, far be it from me to say that prayer isn't enough. It is, but one of my favorite writers is a guy called Frederick Buechner, and he says, he has this line of like, you should always be listening to your life. And I think that God is speaking to us in more ways than just the quiet place of prayer. I think that's one of 6 essentially dynamics of hearing calling is that place of quiet and prayer. But as you said, input from trusted counselor, people that know you, that love Jesus. What do they think about you? What do they think your strengths are? Where do they see you light up, or to see fruit in your life? Vocational kind of questions like APEST, those things are important in trying to discern your calling. Personality, just loving to be good with people, or being good with tasks, or engineering, or something like that. the answer to your calling, but it's a factor. It's something that you listen to. Opportunity. We realized a lot of times people's calling is attached to some place they currently are, some access they currently have. And we just overlook that so easily when it's a massively important part of what God is saying, sort of whispering to you, I put you here for a reason. You have this job for a reason. You're on this block for a reason. You got this degree for a reason. You have this relationship with this company or these people for a reason. Even something as horrible as cancer or something like that. Surviving cancer is a great example, because cancer survivors are uniquely equipped to minister to people who have a diagnosis of cancer, and kind of the rest of us can't. I mean, it's kind of binary. It's not to say that we can't try to be comforting and love people, but
Right.
the difference between somebody. I have a friend. Well, my cousin, my uncle's youngest son, just committed suicide and jumped off a bridge. And I have these friends who 3 years ago, their son, their college age son, jumped off a bridge and committed suicide. Shockingly, like with no signs, of any problems. And the truth is, that's a horrible club to be in. But nobody can comfort them except someone in that club. Not really, not materially. Even to the point of saying to listen to my friend say, I don't want to hear anything from anybody except for a couple that he knew that had lost their child to suicide. So that's a strange way to talk about opportunity, but that becomes a massive, factor in considering, emotional evaluation. We looked at what makes you angry, what fires you up, because not everything does. What makes you deeply sad or deeply emotionally affected, that can often be, that pathos is not something to be marginalized in the search for calling. It's something to actually be to give prominence to think, why am I so emotionally moved by this? Because the truth is, as a missionary person, that's outside of some big visionary leader in a visionary community, you're going to have to find the motivation, the aspiration from somewhere inside. It's intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic motivation, to quote Daniel Pink. So emotion is really important. Like what really just, even anger particularly, I just can't suffer that. That has to change. And that you wake up every morning feeling, and sometimes that is attached to some opportunity, something that's happened. My friends who lost their son, who jumped off the Skyway Bridge, started this campaign and this website of praying for the Skyway Bridge. Because so many hundreds of people have committed suicide by jumping off that particular bridge, as is the case with a lot of big bridges, And so, that passion of someone should do something about this. We have to have call boxes. There needs to be patrols. People need to be praying. Their eyes need to be open, waking up to that and feeling that intrinsic motivation to do that. I think all of those things become part of how we listen to our life, listen to God. But then the tricky thing is, even after a weekend of looking at those 6 factors, people still are gun shy to answer the question.
Yeah.
So we force them to fill in that last triangle and to say, I believe that God is calling me to.
Yes.
And just by faith, you're gonna try and say something, because of course to say nothing is to take a position, an unhelpful position.
We do something, very, very similar. We call it the discovery process, and very similar assessments. And same thing when we debrief, we have a moment where it's we want you to write this down in 1 sentence.
Yeah.
And we want you to do it right now.
And people, it's
I think, but it's a powerful experience.
Yeah.
And I've been amazed at the number of almost like Emmaus moments where people are reading it afterwards, and it's
It's like being born again. It's another. That discovery of who I am and what I'm meant to do, at least for now, is like being born again. I mean, it is another peeling back of revelation that the world just looks different
Mhm.
after you walk out. It's not dissimilar from conversion,
Mhm.
because in a sense it is a new conversion. It's a
Yeah.
conversion to being a sent person,
Yeah.
and to know that actually I have a role to play in the kingdom that only I can play.
Yeah.
Actually, that's mind blowing. It's life changing.
Mhm.
So I was, my parents 2 years ago decided to, I'm going to ask you to tell a story, by the way, of how you've helped somebody walk through this, but I'm going to tee you up while you're thinking about it. So my parents left to go to South Africa for several months to kind of fill in a missionary role. And so I was cutting their grass while they were gone, and I was listening to Underground, which you wrote and then read. And I remember where I was in their yard when I was listening to you, thinking about or reading about sitting down in this burger joint with somebody and they just get to share their dream. And I remember being so inspired in that moment. Like, I want to do that every day. Like, I just want to sit with people
Sign me up, man.
that are dreaming about something and go, yeah, we want to help you. And since then, I've had that like joy as part of this. Like, that'd be one of the things for those listening is, one, read that book and think about that moment of just like, what's the life in that moment that you get to sit with somebody and not tell them, no, that doesn't really fit with what we do, but rather, that sounds crazy. Let's try that. So, like, put some flesh on it. Like, what's one of the stories that stands out to you of just being able to sit and hear one of those dreams of like, I think this is my calling, and being able to help them go, yeah, this is going to lead to the church emerging.
Well, maybe that whole approach, or the centrality really of that. It's funny because that story really um, resonates, means something to a lot of people. I don't know if it's just different than what ministry is normally like for us, where we feel like we have to execute somebody else's plan, but to just listen to somebody, to hear the gem, the diamond of an idea in the middle of it, and just say, if you feel God's called you to do it, you should do that. You should not let anything stop you.
Yes.
And we will give you everything in our power to help
Yes.
you do that. But we, early on, when I was doing campus ministry, we would do this 6-week urban kind of internship. Take people, they would immersion. They would live in the inner city and work at an inner city mission, and we would do this kind of urban theology class. And at the end of it, I would always have these students. So it could be 30 to 50 students a summer, And so at the end of it, I would do this exercise. Would say, okay, you've seen all these needs, all these problems, all these conflated issues. If you were to solve one of them, which one would you solve? And it was just a simulation of like, start a nonprofit to solve that problem. So pick one. So it's just an exercise. You have to pick something that you've seen that you think needs to be fixed, or could be that there's a need. Somebody needs to do more. And then I would put them in groups based on their affinity towards something, and then they would just design a nonprofit to begin to solve that. That was the workshop. That was the exercise. And a bunch of microchurches started from that. Like, students would leave and go, well, I'm going to do that.
What's stopping me, right?
Yeah. And of course we were like, well, you should do that. I mean, the whole point of us doing the exercise is so that it would open up your imagination. But that was the beginning for me of realizing that's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
I mean, basically that's what leadership in our time should look like.
Mm-hmm.
It should be about helping people hear God, see need, feel a deep sense of love and calling based on love. To say that, these people, no one's loving them, no one's helping them, no one's reaching them, or not enough is happening. And I want to be the solution to that. And that is almost always God at work. It's not the flesh, it's not the devil, it's not sin at work in you. So I don't know what's left, but it's probably God, especially if you're going to go work with the poor, you know.
Yeah.
So there are still microchurches today that exist and that are going wonderfully from those
Amen.
workshops, from those exercises. But it changed me, right? It changed me to realize, oh, this isn't just an exercise at the end of an internship experience. This is like what we should all be. This is like what modern leadership in the church should look like. It should look
Amen.
like just saying yes to people as they discover a burden for some place and some people.
Yeah, there's, Brian, as you're talking, there's a story that popped into my head that happened at a training event we had here recently. And it was a church leader. And after we explained and told some stories about helping ordinary people discover their calling and then see microchurches emerge out of that, one of these guys raised his hand. He's like, I have to ask something. He told these stories about these two different little teams. One of them were really into motorcycles and the other one classic cars, and how as they began to pursue their passion, they began to see new communities that were emerging around Jesus.
Yeah.
And they came to him to say, we're not sure what's happening here. This is so amazing. And what he did was he made them ministries of his church, and he began to manage them.
They had to have a representative from that little group sit on their ministry board and show up to the meetings and do all this stuff. It was like,
the thing that was profound though is this man began to weep and repent publicly. He said, I killed it.
Yeah, they killed them.
I killed it. And that's why this conversation we're having, there's two shifts. One is moving from like a centralized paradigm of the church to this decentralized network. And then secondly, it's the shift from management to equipping.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to celebrate again, just the pioneering work that you guys have done to show people an example, a working model. And I just want to offer that story as also just as a cautionary tale. The goal here isn't control or to create some kind of new set of programs. It's about supporting people through equipping and prayer, and especially coaching. So I wanted to kind of pivot into that. Talk about the relationship between calling, discovery, deployment, and coaching. What does that look like in Tampa Underground in your life as you're developing people?
Well, again, I think a part of what you're doing, if you think of like discipleship as a concept or a system, and then you're thinking of injecting this really powerful, potent notion of calling, which is essentially the presence of God, the leadership of God. So now you have my leadership, what I'm doing with you, what I'm trying to teach you or share with you, or my idea of where we should go next, and God. And so essentially what's happening is a triangulation between what I do, what God does in your life to form you into a mature person or into somebody that looks like Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. So when I put it that way, it becomes pretty clear how dangerous it would be for us to take the lead in that triangle, mm-hmm. right? Just how inappropriate, how, well, evil, even possibly, for us to take the lead in that triangle. So to recognize the presence of God as the primary leader teacher in the relationship, we're not called to make disciples of ourselves. We're called to make disciples of Jesus. So the primary relationship is about Jesus.
Yeah.
And that it's about you and him, right? And so that one of the reasons why I think coaching works in this structure, this whatever construct, is because a good coach, good coaching understands that, well, the way that the coaching literature would put it is the person being coached always has the answer, and that what you do as a coach is you help them find it.
Amen.
you really have to believe that. I mean, and I'm not a good coach, but I just want to go on record. I'm not. I can't hang in there long enough. I just want to say what I think. I try. I can go a good 15 minutes. What else? Tell me. Like the three most important questions a coach asks is, "Tell me more."
Mm-hmm.
And because it's there. Tell me more. Tell me why. Tell me what do you think you should do? And then how do you think you should face that? But it's this belief, this almost fanatical belief that this person has the answer.
Yeah.
And the coach's job is to help them find it.
Amen. The headship of Jesus in their life is the answer.
So that if that's what secular coaches are saying about coaching, what do we think? So now we're like, it's not just that you have the answer, it's that you have the answerer. And actually the ultimate leader is right there, within fingertip touching of your decision making.
Come on.
Your heart, whatever. So what am I doing there? Right? What's my role? When the God who made you and saved you and died for you is right there accessible to your mind, to your heart, to your decision making. What am I doing? The only thing that's plausible in that situation is to draw attention to him, to take the hand and to put it into the other hand. So I think in that way, coaching is an elegant way of thinking about leadership in general.
Yeah.
That what we're meant to do with other Christians is not leadership in the sort of 20th century iteration of leadership, which is about direction and dominance. That I don't mean it that way. I don't mean it as some sort of horrible thing, but it's about taking a hill,
right?
And it's about collecting an army, to go with me or whatever. And I think this is a more elegant solution to a decentralized thing. Say, look, I literally cannot lead you in that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. I'm not capable of it because only God can do that. And he's right there accessible to you. What is God saying to you? How is he leading you? How has he shaped you? What has he already shown you? What have you already heard? And I'm telling you, I mean, what is it? The end of Romans, where Paul says something like, I say all of these things. I mean, this is the book that started the Protestant Reformation. This is probably the deepest theological treatise in the Bible, right? He says at the end of Romans, he says, I just say all these things to remind you of stuff you already know.
That's like a verse you're like, well, Paul, not really, I didn't know all that.
I don't think I knew all that. But he's like, you already, and that's his argument for why he's going to go to Spain, right? Why he's not going to come to Rome. As important as Rome is in the empire, he's like, you actually don't need me because you have the Spirit's presence. And all this stuff I've been saying, the truth is you kind of already knew it. It's already something that the Spirit was teaching you. And so I have to go to Spain because they haven't heard any of it. They don't have the Spirit of God in them, and you do. Bottom line, that's the differentiator for Paul between whether he goes to Rome or goes to Spain. And something about that is just really
so powerful,
almost like the answer to the way we're meant to lead in the time in which we live, where we almost just refuse actually a conventional form of leadership in people's lives, and we just say, I just can't, I won't. I'm not equipped. But I can help you hear God. I can help you discover. I can certainly give you advice, or I can tell you what I would do or what I have done. We can tell stories. It's the difference, Rob, between adopting models and stories. Models are meant to be replicated and repeated. Stories are meant to inspire us. They're meant to make our own story. So everything we've called a model is probably just better understood as a story.
Amen.
And we can hear that story, learn from it, copy it, part of it, but to just take a model and replicate that model, whatever, is to then lose your own story. It's to not realize that actually God has a very unique thing for only you to do in the world.
It's like jazz, like, all right, there's standards, but everyone plays them a different way. And you're supposed to,
the exploration of it.
We wanted to your book. So
yep, that's where I was going. We will spend a half an hour on your book or so, and now you have 5 minutes to give us an overview, because we want to hear about the 6 seasons of calling, and I just think it'll be a helpful way to kind of wrap up our time to hear what you just put out, how people can explore that.
Yeah, so I think maybe, and maybe it is a good place to end our conversation, because when we feel called by God into a place or to a people group, is that forever? Is that for the whole of our life? And I think maybe when you're young, we certainly made this mistake that you kind of think it is, that
Right.
that you think that calling is this static thing. That once God has answered you, buy the ticket to this place, that it's like, that's it for life. And then what happens, in my opinion, in my experience, is about every 10, 12 years, it isn't right anymore. And something dramatic is actually changing about you, about the context of your life, about what you've accomplished, about the people around you. And actually there is a change, a dynamism to calling that I would argue about 6 times in your life you sort of go through this isn't quite right, and you go back to God with a crisis, actually, a crisis of identity. Who am I? When the kids, like, I'm down to 1 kid. I have 6 children. There's 1 kid left in the house, and when he leaves, Monica and I are going to look at each other and go, what do we do now? Like, who are we now? And those kind of massive changes in our lives, they're meant to be turning points. They're meant to bring us back, just like when we were 22, 23, when we went to God and said, who am I? And what do you want for my life? And send me, show me. And I'm saying that happens at about mid-30s. It happens in your late 40s. It happens when you're 60. It happens when you're 70. Like, there are these major turning points that we can sort of notice. When Jesus says to his disciples, there are many things that I would want to say to you, but I can't tell you now. Before he talks about, in my Father's house there are many rooms. It's like, you get a little bit of revelation when you're 20, and it's not enough for actually your whole life. And there's only so much you can handle, and only so much you can understand. So I think that's essentially what the book is about. It's about these 6 major transitions, these sort of days. Like, if you think of your life as a week of creation, God created the world in 6 days. What is your life, what as an act of creation going to look like? And so to see the kind of like repeated pattern that many of us go through. So I don't know if you guys have read it, but the people that are feeding back, and actually, from all my work with calling and with hundreds of people that we've seen go through calling, and recognizing that what they hear when they're 20 is different than what they hear when they're in their 30s and 40s and so on. And maybe that's all very healthy and very normal.
Yeah. So where's the best place for people to find that book?
Oh, you can get it anywhere books are sold. Like Amazon, whatever. I don't know. Yeah, it's out there.
Anywhere books are sold. Amazon.
Is there another place? I don't know. Not for me.
Yeah, that's so good. A couple of resources I would encourage those of you listening as well is to go to tampaunderground.com and just search the Calling Lab. There's a companion book. There's a course you can go through. There's the book Find Your Place that Rob wrote with Brian Phipps, and just digging into that GPS and understanding your gifts, your passions, your story, and how the collision of those 3 things can help you discern calling. So those are a few that jump to my mind, that if you're dreaming about it at all, go explore them and step into those.
Yeah. I just want to say too, there's a free assessment for that if people want to take that. It givespassionstory.com.
Yeah. Awesome. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and for all of those watching as well. Again, we want this to be a space where we're learning from pioneers in the microchurch paradigm and world, and that have done all the things and bring new voices in. We'll continue to hear from different leaders within Tampa, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new series of just hearing the emergence of these different microchurch networks across the country. We say grace and peace.